Hey everyone, Tin Man here with another competitive deck tech. This is a video series where I highlight competitive Eternal decks that are well suited for ranked or tournament play. In each of these videos I'll discuss the overall game plan of the deck, how each card fits into that game plan, other options that you may want to try to fit your own personal style, and how the deck matches up against other popular decks in the format. So let's get to it. Today we've got the boogeyman of the format, Argenport Midrange. It's one of the most popular decks in the format right now, and it's a deck that you absolutely have to understand and have a game plan for whenever you're going to be playing ranked or tournament play. This deck is a mid-range deck. It's a very archetypical mid-range deck where it's neither fully an aggressive deck and it's not really fully a control deck either. It fits somewhere in the middle of those two. Against opposing aggressive decks, it tries to take the more controlling route, and subsequently against opposing control decks, tries to take a more aggressive route. So it does that by playing very efficient threats such as Unseen Commando, Impending Doom, and Tavrod to go aggressive and also gain value, whereas against aggro decks it relies on cheap removal such as Annihilate, Slay, Vara's Favor, etc. So let's get right into the deck list here. So at the beginning of our curve in the 1-drop spot, we've got Protect and Sabotage. So these cards Protect is rarely played on turn 1, so it's a little bit of a misleading to put it into this category, but Sabotage is often a good turn 1 play. It disrupts your opponent, it takes out whatever kind of key piece of their hand they may have. If they have only, say, a single removal spell, well then you can blunt their ability to deal with your threats by taking their one removal spell. Alternatively, if they have, maybe they have something like Seek Power or Vara's Favor, and then if you take that, maybe they don't have enough power to even play the game in the first place. So, Sabotage overall is a very versatile card, and you don't want to leave home without 4 of them. They're very good in a wide variety of matchups. Protect, on the other hand, is a bit more situational. It's why we're only running 2 of. It's not going to be universally good every time, but when it does come up big, is protecting your larger threats, such as Impending Doom or Tavrod. So for that reason, you often want to play one of these bigger threats a turn later. So say play Impending Doom when you have 5 power or Tavrod when you have 6, so that you can hold open Protect for it. Moving on down, we've got our 2-drop removal suite. We've got Annihilate and Vanquish at 2 each, although these numbers are absolutely flexible depending on what's popular right at the moment. These cards are extremely efficient removal spells in that they can often deal with things that cost much more than them. They only cost 2 power each, but often you can kill something that costs 4, 5, 6, or more with them. So in that sense, your opponent has spent their whole late game turn playing a huge threat, and you answer it for simply 2 power, and you also get to deploy, say, another unit at the same time. And that'll get you some tempo in the game and allow you to keep on pushing damage to your opponent and eventually winning the game. Argenport Instigator is a card that recently got nerfed. It added a second shadow requirement to its cost, which significantly reduces the consistency in which you'll be able to cast this on turn 2. However, it's still the best 2-drop in the game. It is over budgeted. It's a 3/3 for only 2, which is a very large unit. It also has a trigger, which is not... This deck is not really trying to capitalize on that so much. It's more of an incidental trigger. For some of the more aggressive decks where every single point on the opponent really matters every time, such as Bandit Queen aggro, then that trigger is more relevant. Here, it's really just a good body for 2 cost. Also, we have Vara's Favor, who's a good removal spell against opposing aggressive decks. It can kill Oni Ronins or other 1 toughness units. And it also helps to smooth out your power base, since this essentially counts as a Shadow Sigil in your hand when you're wondering how much power do I have to work with. It can also be used to instant speed, or not instant speed rather, but it can be used to destroy, say, an opposing weapon, such as a Runehammer. If you don't have a unit on the board to be able to attack them, you can use this as a direct damage spell to pop their weapon. In the 3-cost spot is where we really start making our money here. These are some of the most powerful 3-cost cards in the game right now. We'll start with Unseen Commando, which is, in my opinion, the most powerful 3-cost card in the game. This card just does a lot. It's a 2/3 lifesteal blocker, which makes a lot of 2-power opposing aggro units very ineffective, since it can block them profitably plus gain life. If you need to get offensive, it's a 3/4 on his own, which is already a very respectable attacker. It is flying, so it's hard to deal with. And his secondary trigger is actually quite relevant for buffing himself or something that you may have put Protect on to get the second battle skill. So say you could put a Protect on a Valkyrie Enforcer, an Impending Doom, or a Tavrod, and now they'll also start getting buffed up by Unseen Commando. Speaking of which, you also have Valkyrie Enforcer, who is a good catch-all answer. He's not quite as good of an attacker as Unseen Commando, because he doesn't have lifesteal, and he only has 3 toughness, as opposed to the 4 whenever Unseen Commando is attacking. But he still provides a valuable way of answering your opponent's cards. A silence effects cannot be... I can't overstate how important they can be against certain opposing strategies. We also have Bloodletter, which is an amazingly efficient weapon. Allows you to use lifesteal on some of your bigger hitters. Obviously, Unseen Commando naturally has lifesteal, but putting a Bloodletter on something like an Impending Doom, an Argenport Instigator, or a Tavrod, or an Auric Interrogator is really going to help swing the race against opposing aggressive decks, but also against opposing control decks, it really puts the clock on them much faster. Slay is another efficient removal spell. It kind of falls right in line with Vanquish and Annihilate. It's more universally applicable, which is why we run the full 4 of. Although it does cost 1 more and it's not a fast spell, it can still deal with any unit or pop off the Aegis off of a unit for, no strings attached. You pay 3, you kill a unit, and you're often killing something that costs much more than 3, which makes this a very efficient, very useful, just generically useful spell. I guess I kind of glazed over Auric Interrogator. This card is not always the most played card. Sometimes you'll see Tinker Overseer in this spot, the 2-cost 2/2 flying. You may also see Stone Powder Alchemist now that he got buffed up to only cost 3 instead of 4. But this is a flexible spot. I think Auric Interrogator is better against the controlling versions of the deck, since he can help you draw you more cards, which helps obviously to go later in the game against the controlling decks. But he's not quite as useful against the aggressive decks like, say, a Stone Powder Alchemist, or even a 2-cost flying blocker such as Tinker Overseer might be. But if the meta is leaning more towards controlling decks, Auric Interrogator is definitely a good bet. Up in the 4-cost spot, we've got some of our harder to deal with threats in the Impending Doom. He's a 4-cost 5/5 flyer, which is just very overstated for what he is, for what he costs, similar to Argenport Instigator. He's a big threat, he's got flying, he has a small drawback in that he deals 1 damage to you each turn, but only against the most aggressive decks when you're kind of on the back foot does that really apply. Auric Runehammer is a great way to get a 2-for-1. If you already have some board control, you removed a lot of their early guys with your removal spells, maybe you have a blocker out in a Unseen Commando or an Auric Interrogator, you can play a Runehammer, destroy their unit with 4 toughness, and still be able to swing it next turn, because you'll have a blocker back to protect it. So this can definitely generate a lot of great value in the mid-game. And then we've got the man himself, the Tav God, Tavrod Auric Broker. This card is a card that many people are calling overpowered. They think it's way too strong. They think it should be nerfed in some way. It survived the most recent balance patch, so why aren't you playing it? This card he does a whole lot. So he obviously has very restrictive influence requirements. He needs Double Justice and Double Shadow. But what you get for that rate is amazing. A 5/7 body is very difficult to deal with, especially when he has Endurance. He can't be stunned by common things such as Permafrost. He can't be destroyed by other removal spells such as Obliterate or Annihilate, since he's 2 colors. Vanquish does deal with him, and so does Slay, but pretty much nothing else really deals with him very efficiently. Even if they silence him, 5/7 is still a huge body to try to deal with. And if you actually get to attack with him, oh buddy, you get to draw hopefully 2 cards, a Minotaur and a weapon. Obviously you have Auric Runehammers and Bloodletters as weapons, and other Minotaurs, well, other copies of Tavrod count, and so do Auric Interrogators. So in an ideal world, you get to attack with him, you get to draw 2 cards, they're supercharged with +5 power, and he just generates so much value if he sticks around. And as I mentioned before, he's very likely to stick around because not many removal spells actually deal with him. You also additionally have Protect or Sabotage to get rid of... You can Protect to just protect him with Aegis, or Sabotage to remove their removal spell from their hand before they even get a chance to play it. He's really the linchpin of the deck, and he's what brings so many of these other aspects together. So using efficient removal spells like Annihilate, Vanquish, Slay is not the best. You're kind of just treading water against opposing threats. But if you're using that to clear the way of their only threat and you're left with a Tavrod or Impending Doom or some other large threat, then those cards are going to run away with the game as you're squashing your opponent's resistance very efficiently. The power base is nothing too terribly interesting. Since we are in Argenport, we do get to play Crest of Vengeance, whereas some of the other 2-color decks don't get access to Crests. This is particularly good since our turn 1 play, we really only have Sabotage. We're not going to play Protect on turn 1 very often, so this is a great card to play on turn 1 to help set up your future draws. Other than that, the 4 banners, 4 Seat of Vengeance are pretty standard, and the Justice and Shadow Sigils as appropriate based on the color requirements. I'll point out that you do need double Justice, much more than you need double Shadow, because of the Valkyrie Enforcer Unseen Commando. Although I guess maybe that's not entirely true since you have Auric Interrogator and Impending Doom. But since you have Vara's Favor, that helps to balance it out, as these essentially count as 4 extra Shadow Sigils, which is why you see a more balance towards the Justice Sigils in your power base. So I kind of touched already on some of the other cards you may want to try out. I think the main flex spot in this deck that you'd be interested in flexing out is the Auric Interrogators, possibly to Tinker Overseer, Stone Powder Alchemist, or something else that kind of fits that early to mid-game board stabilization, but also somewhat of a threat card. The key with a lot of any card that goes in this deck is it really needs to play double roles. A lot of the units play 2 roles. They are good on defense against aggressive decks, but they're also good on offense against control decks. They achieve that by just having large bodies, such as Argenport Instigator, Unseen Commando, well, he just does everything, Impending Doom, and Tavrod both play equally well on offense as well as defense. So one of the key things that makes this deck so good is how efficient its removal spells are. If you're trying to play 4, 5, and 6 cost threats, 4, 5, and 6 cost units, larger things, you're just going to get out-tempoed by getting hit with a Slay or a Vanquish or Annihilate. Say your opponent pays 4 power to play a Sandstorm Titan, and you just immediately deal with it with an Annihilate, plus also you get to play an Auric Interrogator. Or you get to play, a Bloodletter or Unseen Commander. You get to develop your board while also efficiently dealing with your opponent's board. That's a recipe for success for Argenport Midrange. So a lot of those kind of more mid-rangey decks, this is simply the best version of it. They're going to be able to naturally thrive against those decks that want to play those mid-range kind of creatures or units. Where this deck really struggles is against very aggressive decks or very heavy control decks. When it's trying to go down the middle path, you really have to go way underneath it and try to play early units, or you have to go way above it and try to play huge late game threats that not even their removal spells deal with all that well, or have massive card draw so that you can just simply have more threats than they have answers. In the meantime, a heavy control deck, say that runs things like Icaria, will line up quite well against 1-for-1 removal spells like Slay or Vanquish or Annihilate, since she naturally has Aegis. She naturally gets value right away with her Warcry trigger. And you also pack your own deck, the Icaria deck, with a lot of spot removal to deal with things, the threats that Argenport Midrange deploys, such as Auric Interrogator, Unseen Commando, etc. All of these cards are quite easily dealt with other spot removal, such as their own Slays, Torch for some of the earlier ones, or Harsh Rule for pretty much everything. However, the way Argenport counters that is with things like Sabotage and Protect. So if you're facing a lot of those control decks, you may want to up the numbers on those, or decreasing the number of less efficient removal spells. On the flip side, if you want to go underneath this deck, you kind of flip it on its head, right? I just spent a lot of time talking about how efficient their removal is. They cost 2 or 3 power, and it just straight up kills a unit. What if all of your units only cost 1 or 2? Maybe some that cost 3. Suddenly you've kind of flipped the script on them. Suddenly their removal is no longer trading up in power, it now has to trade down. If you have a powerful 2 power unit, or a unit that costs 2 power, it's pretty inefficient for them to slay it. But if it's still a threat, they have to deal with it somehow, and the only way they can deal with it is by playing their own suddenly inefficient removal spells. However, you have to be wary with that strategy because Bloodletter is a huge threat against those kind of aggressive decks that rely on getting the early beatdowns going. Bloodletter on something like Impending Doom or Tavrod will just end the game on the spot against aggro decks. So, in summary, this deck has a lot of game against every deck that's out there. It can adapt to fight more aggressive decks. It can play more aggressive against controlling decks. It really is kind of the jack of all trades, but perhaps master of none. That being said, it's an extremely powerful deck. It can fit into a lot of metas. It will never find itself completely out of options to deal with whatever your opponent is throwing at you. So I hope this helped you to understand a little bit more about how Argenport Midrange works, how to better attack it, and how to better think about the game plan that they're trying to enact so that you can try to counteract that as you're building and playing your own decks. So thanks for watching, everyone. I really appreciate it. You can check out the gameplay video, which I'll have a link to right here. And you can also check out my stream, which is linked down below, twitch.tv/tinman354 to check out gameplays for this and other awesome Eternal decks. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.